Moshe Rabbeinu, in our portion, Re'eh, is terribly concerned with the goal of centralizing religious worship among Bnei Yisrael. You see, the surrounding idolatrous nations all gave their sacrifices on private altars, on bamot. But Moshe says, Lo ta'asun ken l'Hashem Elokeichem. Do not worship your God this way. Our God is worshipped only in one central place that he will choose, namely the temple in Jerusalem. Now, it's true that over the course of the years in the Midbar, those years when there was not a Mishkan available, they did have private bamot, private altars upon which they offered sacrifices. But Moshe says once there's a central place to worship, that's where you have to go. And the Mishnah and the Talmud in the 14th chapter of Tractate Zvachim note that over the course of the years of Bnei Yisrael's history, there were times in which they went back to offering sacrifices on bamot, when they first entered the land of Canaan in the beginning of the book of Joshua. And there was not yet a resting place for the Mishkan. They had private altars. Once the Mishkan found its home in Shiloh, you were not allowed to give a sacrifice at an altar any longer. You had to go to Shiloh. 369 years later, when Eli HaKohen died and Shiloh fell to the enemy, bamot were permitted once again for 57 years, until King Solomon built the temple and we were able to give sacrifices there in one central location once again. Now, my question is, why is it that the Torah values having a centralized place of worship? Isn't it more convenient to have private altars? Won't more people give sacrifices if that's what they're supposed to do? If it's more convenient, closer by, easier than having one centralized location? Why this focus on a central location? Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch in his commentary offers two reasons. The first reason is that only at the national site of God's sanctuary, erected to the Torah, is it guaranteed that the offerer will place his consciousness of God on the basis of the Torah. Only there is it assured that he will seek God's closeness only by devotion to the Torah. Yeah, personal altars are convenient, but over the years, it's guaranteed that each one of those altars will lead to its own theology, its own religion, its own form of worship. It will no longer be part of Judaism, part of our religion. Reason number one. Reason number two, he says, the sanctuary shall fulfill its purpose of sanctifying the whole life of the people, together with the Torah, which is its essential content. The sanctuary shall become the center elevated above the community and the individuals. This center shall draw everyone to it and bind everyone in the same obligation. Everyone shall be equally responsible to it and responsible for it. In other words, it brings us closer to God and Torah, but it also brings us closer to each other. It highlights the achrayut, the responsibility we have to each other, for each other's religious lives, and ultimately for each other's physical lives as well. And that's the reason, says Rav Hirsch, for the emphasis that the Torah places on having a central place of worship. Nowadays, we no longer have sacrifices. However, according to Maimonides in the Guide of the Perplexed, sacrifice, was the natural inclination, the natural form of religious worship in the ancient world. Today, the natural form is prayer. Ezoy avodah shebalev, zoy tefillah. Worship of the heart is prayer. And we no longer have a temple in Jerusalem, but we have our synagogues, which are mikdashei me'at. They're not the temple, but they're small synagogues modeled after the temple in Jerusalem in many ways. And I think that we should regard our synagogues as mikdashei me'at, as the central place for our communities. Over the last several months, people's prayer habits have shifted dramatically in the Jewish community. For some, they're davening at home. In other communities, there is a backyard minyan on every block. And those ways of praying are very meaningful and are certainly very convenient. It's nice to daven on Shabbos morning whenever I want, and to have breakfast when I want, and lunch when I want, and family time when I want it. And it's nice to daven around the corner on my block. It's all very, with other people, like-minded people, who want to daven just like me. It's all very convenient. But we lose something great when we lose that synagogue community cohesion. And I think that we should be careful not to idealize our current situation, which is necessary. Baruch Hashem, many synagogues, including ours, have opened for limited services with registration and social distancing. And many people still feel uncomfortable attending services physically. And if they do, if you feel uncomfortable, you should not attend services right now in person. But our ideal, what we strive towards, should most certainly be a synagogue at the center of a community. Only in that way can we be sure, like Moshe writes, like Moshe says about the Beit HaMikdash, only that way can we be sure, A, that we're still following the Torah, that our connections are not only subjective connections that we make for ourselves, but they're connections that are rooted in the Torah and in halacha and in its teachings. And only in that way can we have communal cohesion. Can we distribute tzedakah in the ways that are really necessary in the community? Can we have programs that involve everyone and make sure that people feel included? Berov am hadrat melech. Prayer, say the rabbis, is best done in large numbers. And based on that principle, the Shulchan Aruch, based on the Gemara, rules that in a town where there's a large synagogue and a small synagogue, in principle, one is supposed to attend the large synagogue. Berov am hadrat melech. And so I hope and I pray that we will be able to return to full communal life very, very soon. And I know that it's going to involve some difficulties at the beginning and some getting out of habits that we have made now. But we should remember that the habits that we have now are only temporary because the hour calls for it. It's a tzorech sha'ah. Much like the personal altars were in a time when there was no Mishkan or there was no Beit HaMikdash. But when, please God, our synagogues open, may it be very soon, I hope to see you all there once again. And I hope that we support our synagogues and attend them in person and make sure that we can join together as a community and celebrate together and mourn together and daven together in ways that bring us closer to God and closer to each other. Shabbat Shalom.